And my friend went to this barber a couple months ago and sat down in the chair, and the barber started right in on him. He said, "So what's new with you?" And my friend said, "Well, I'm going to Rome, Italy next month." And the barber said, "Rome, Italy? This time of year, it's terrible over there. There's smog, air pollution, the traffic's terrible. Why in the world?" My friend said, "What can I tell you? It's all set, it's all planned. I'm going to Rome, Italy." And the barber said, "Well, how are you getting there anyway?" And my friend said, "Well, I'm flying on Pan Am." Barber said, "Pan Am? Are you crazy? That is the world's worst airline. Lose your bags, the food's terrible." What? My friend said, "What can I tell you? My agent got me the tickets. It's all set. I'm ready to go." Barber said, "Well, why in the world are you going to Rome, Italy anyway?" And my friend said, "Well, you're not going to believe this, but when I get to Rome, Italy, I have a private audience with the Pope." Barber said, "Man, are you kidding me? Private audience? You know, you're going to be ushered into this piazza, and the Pope's going to come out on the balcony. He's going to do one of these, and that's going to be your private audience." My friend said, "Well, it's all set. What can I do?" 2 months later, he's been to Rome. He comes back. He needs a haircut again. He sits right back in the chair, and the barber starts right back in on him. He says, "Yeah, well, how was Rome, huh?" My friend said, "Well, you're not going to believe it, but wasn't air pollution. Traffic was good. People were nice. I really enjoyed Rome." Barber didn't think too much of that. He said, "Yeah, well, how was Pan Am, huh?" And my friend said, "Well, believe it or not, they left on time, arrived on time, didn't lose my bags. Flight attendants were nice. Food was good. I enjoyed it." Barber thought for a moment. He didn't think too much of that. Then he said, "Yeah, well, how about your private audience with the Pope, huh?" And my friend said, "Well, you're not going to believe it, but I went to the Vatican. I rapped on those big wooden doors, you know, and some aide came out and brought me in, and they took me into this long hall, the red carpet down the long hall. And at the end of the hall, kind of on a throne, sat the Pope. Now, there were some aides, maybe they were cardinals, I don't know, around him. When I first went in the hall, I started to walk down that carpet towards the Pope, and as I walked down, those other folks scattered. And I looked around, and suddenly there I was alone with the Pope, and I knelt down right in front of him. He put his hand on my head, he looked down at me, and you know what he said to me? He said, "My son, that is the worst haircut I have ever seen." You can tell that to your skeptical friends. Thomas Jefferson said that revolution in human affairs, like storms in the natural environment, are from time to time a necessary and good thing. And I will prove that to you. I think one of the imperatives of leadership in a corporation is to, from time to time, create some form of revolution. And let me explain to you why that is necessary. This is a life cycle curve. Pretend that's a bell-shaped curve. We won't be scientific about this, okay? Now, this curve, Arnold Toynbee studied, as I mentioned this morning, the rise and fall of 21 civilizations, cultures, emergence, decline. Companies tend to parallel some of the cultural characteristics of that rise and fall. Do not confuse this curve. This is a curve of the culture, not to be confused with another curve, which is the curve of the assets, the material size of the society or the corporation. And I can prove to you that over 21 civilizations, the culture was the leading indicator, and the material assets was the lagging indicator. Rome conquered the British Isles, built Hadrian's Wall, the outer reach of Roman civilization, 200 to 300 years after the decline of the culture internally was clearly taking place. How do you know it was taking place? The family, the core institution was falling apart, alcoholism and drug abuse was high, they had deficit problems, people didn't want to serve in the legions. I'm sure none of this is all other. The material size, you see, even though the human vitality is lost, the creativity, the energy, the willingness to sacrifice and dedicate oneself to the purpose, to the cause, even though that gets lost, simply the size of the mass continues its momentum. It's law of physics, right? It keeps on moving for a while, and it keeps on gathering assets even though human vitality is declining. General Motors lost its creativity, lost its loyalty, lost the human elements 10, 15, 20 years prior to the loss of market share. They didn't first lose market share and then lose the culture. The reverse happens, okay? And that is the repeated pattern over and over again in companies and in larger cultures. And he said the leader is like the Pied Piper marching down the street playing the beautiful melody, the tune. And the dancers fall merrily behind, joyfully dancing to the tune. But at some point the leader loses the tune and turns to observe the dancers falling out of line, seizes the lash to now whip them back into line, assuring their rebellion. And that's the whole cycle, from creative to dominant leadership. Toynbee said that the process of growth was the process of challenge and response. And growth in a culture occurs from leaders recognizing present challenges and responding creatively. Heroic leaders are heroic because they have issued forth creative responses to challenge. They respond creatively to challenge, and that successful response does not lead to a condition of ease, but rather leads to a higher level challenge requiring a new and creative response. That successful response does not lead to a condition of ease, but rather to a higher level challenge requiring a new and creative response. Got it? When, on the other hand, the leaders begin to rely on yesterday's successful response, but in the presence of today's challenge, in other words, a condition of ease has been reached, that signals death and decline. The concept of a condition of ease is an important concept. The muscle grows. This is a kind of a laws of organic life, whether it's in the human body or in the mind or in the larger culture. Things in a condition of ease die. One can easily argue that during the 50s and 60s, the American automobile industry and some other industries achieved a condition of ease. They believed that they controlled the market, they could determine customer preferences, and they therefore, because of that failure now to respond creatively to challenge, began to lose their edge, okay? One other, a law of dynamic motion. So cultures that are emerging, growing, are in dynamic motion. Primitive societies, prior to civilizing, are in a static state. Aborigines in Western Australia remained static for tens of thousands of years, did not change, because they were not clashing, competing with other cultures. The moment they come into competition with other cultures, they become dynamic, they get into a process of change. When they begin to decline, they become dominant, they again become static. Okay? There's a correlate, however, to the law of dynamic motion that's very important to understand. I have an 8-year-old son. You come to my house, we have not prepared for your coming. You walk upstairs and you go to the right, open his door, you walk into his bedroom with no preparation for you. You look down on the floor, what do you think you see? A mess, right? I mean the Lincoln Logs and the Legos and dirty underwear, and it's all there, right? Now what do you think the probability is that when he comes home from school at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, looks down on the mess, he says to himself, God, this makes me so anxious. I wish things were in their place where they belong. If you have an 8-year-old who responds that way, you better have him checked out, man, because something's broken. No 8-year-old ever was worried about the mess, okay? Who's worried about the mess? Old people, right? Old people are worried about the mess. They want things orderly in their place. Kids don't understand. I don't know where this comes from. Why do they want, who cares? Why do they want this in their place? But somehow, and have you ever known somebody, and aging is not just a chronological process, there are mental processes there. It is possible to become old in some psychological aspects during the 20s. People stop growing, they stop responding to challenge, they get locked into current ways of doing things, and that's a sign of aging. And people who age mentally sometimes become obsessed with order, everything in its place. I was working with a company in Atlanta that was doubling in size every year. 3 years I worked with them, it had nothing to do with my consulting, I just happened to be around. But they went from 7 to 16 to $35 million. And I went there one day, and the president, who was the entrepreneur, gave me some names of some people to interview, and I interviewed this gal in the morning. She told me some of her concerns, and then in the afternoon, I interviewed the guy that she reported to. And I mentioned during my interview that Mary had said something in the morning about some, and he got this puzzled look on his face. And I said, you know, Mary. He said, no, I don't know, Mary. Well, she reports to you. She does this, you know. I said, she does? I said, well, the president thinks she does, and she thinks she does. I think she reports to you. I said, you know, I thought to myself, boy, this is, you talk about, I mean, management 101, day one. I mean, you know who reports to you, you know what their job is, right? I mean, this is a disaster. And this was characteristic of this place. It was a madhouse. It was the most disorderly, incredibly out-of-control place I'd ever seen. But, of course, they were doubling every year in size. What's your company doing? There are companies where people actually have job descriptions that are what they do. But that probably negatively correlates with growth curves. Okay? What do we manage to? We manage to this, right? We manage to the numbers. The numbers of what? The numbers of the material size, right? You have to understand the relationship between Alexander and his soldiers. There was a love affair between Alexander and his soldiers. And that love affair was an earned love affair. Emotional responses don't happen by memo. They happen by human interaction that earns the emotional response. Alexander rode into battle, and every battle he rode at the front of his cavalry, which were called what? Anybody know? Symbols, but it's important. His cavalry were called his companions. He rode physically at the front of his companions. He was wounded on every limb of his body. On the plains of Isis before the battle the night before in his tent, senior officers were there. They sang songs together. They drank together. They passed notes to give to their loved ones if they didn't make it. Alexander charged right into the center of King Darius's line, where King Darius and his guards were lined up to meet them, and hand-to-hand combat caused King Darius to retreat, creating a retreat of the entire army and the slaughter of the Persian army. After the battle, Alexander went to the tents of the wounded men, knelt down and prayed with the wounded men, asked them to tell them his story of battle, would go out and tell their story of battle, making a hero of the common soldier. Coming back across the Indian desert, the soldiers who were walking, officers were mounted, they were dying of thirst and starvation. Alexander was the first of the officers to dismount and go back and walk with his soldiers and share in their suffering. Why? Because if you love someone and they are suffering, where do you want to be? With them. And what is it's a law of physics. What's the response that's guaranteed in return? Love comes back. You can call it loyalty, you call it whatever you want, but it comes back, it's sure shot, guaranteed, right? And today, 2,000 years hence, managers are prone to send memos from the 40th floor of the office tower saying, tell the bastards to be loyal. Can't quite understand why, you know. Cortez was a barbarian, lands on the shores of Mexico. What was the first thing he did? First order Cortez did. Previous Spanish explorers had failed to conquer. Landed with 11 ships, right? Dismounted 600 soldiers. First order, burn the ships. This was not the controller of the expedition who was, right? Those guys aren't in charge yet, see? Simple structure. Attila, Alexander, Cortez lived in tents, one-story buildings, one room. They didn't have a living room, a den, a rec room, and a dining room, right? They had a room. That's it. No stories because they're moving, they're conquering, they're moving across the plain. Aztecs, tall structure, complex structure, same. The mind follows similar patterns as the physical structure we live in. Sounds silly, but it's true. Cortez and his folks thought simple, huh? Burn the ship. That's kind of simple thinking. At the front of his column, marching into the jungle towards Montezuma, they're carrying the cross. Montezuma and the Aztecs believed they'd lost their god. Quetzalcoatl disappeared and left them. 60,000 waiting for the 600. And the 600 conquered the 60,000. The walls came tumbling down. And it was not the conquering of the material assets. And it wasn't the conquering of a complex plan or complex systems. It was the conquering of the human spirit, because Cortez understood what Alexander understood, which General Patton understood. General Patton said every war is the same. The tools change, but you defeat the soul of man. And business is the same. It's the culture, it's the soul of man that you are in competition with. And when you understand that, then you begin to understand leadership, and you begin to understand the imperative of managing the culture. You can't stay in that stage of development, though. You go into the next stage. On Alexander's death, the empire fell apart because there was no empire. There was no structure. It was why George Washington would not be king, because he understood the next stage of development, which is the age of what I call, I'm sorry for these rotten overheads, you rate me a 0 on visual aids. Builder and explorer, it's the age of specialization, right? And it's the age of the development of systems and institutions. Alexander never entered that period, okay? But it's the period you must enter as you're building a company, all right? First, we're kind of a band of followers working together. But you begin to specialize. When three of us form a company, we don't have a finance department. Finance department, hell. We got a drawer where the checkbook is. That's the finance department. You want to see the books? It's a checkbook. That's it, right? I mean, that's the degree of specialization we got. But as we grow, we begin to specialize, and competitive advantage increasingly comes from specialization in structure and in product. And if you study the story of the Spanish Armada, historically what happened there basically was, while King Philip II was still in the age of supreme autocracy and commanded the Duke of Parma up in Holland, the Duke of Medina Sidonia, to get on 150 ships and head up there to conquer England, there was no naval command structure, and land generals ordered the building of ships. If you're a sailor, you'll appreciate this. Where up in England, something else was going on. They were developing specialized structure. And you had a queen up there, Queen Elizabeth, who had a relationship with Sir Francis Drake, who she called my dear pirate. And Francis Drake had her ear. Or there's rumor that he had more than that, but he at least had her ear. And Francis Drake convinced her that us sailors know something about ships and fighting at sea. And the specialized structure of the naval structure was created by Sir Francis Drake. Had John Hawkins, also an ex-pirate, build the ships, race-built ships, low to the water, could beat to windward. The Spanish ships couldn't beat to windward worth the damn, so these tall castles on them, right? The winds blow down the English Channel. The English maintain windward position, falling down and then beating back up to windward on the Spanish Armada. Spanish Armada never had a chance because it was specialized structure, specialized tools. And that leads to competitive advantage as things become complex. That's the age of building and expanding and then beating back up to windward on the Spanish Armada. Spanish Armada never had a chance because it was specialized structure, specialized tools. And that leads to competitive advantage as things become complex. But there's some predictable stages in this process. There is the first stage, what I call the age of the prophet. That's what that says. And it's with a P-H-E-T, And it is true that in the beginning is the word, the idea, the vision, the values, the Thomas Edison, the Henry Ford, etc. But you can't stay in that stage for long. There is no organization per se. There may be a set of disciples, following the brilliant engineer into the formation of a company, but it's probably a mess in terms of anything that what one might call organization. These people tend to get lost in the wilderness and so forth. Don't trust them to manage much. Next stage of development, there is what I then call the barbarian. And the barbarian is not the guy you most want to work for. You may work for him, but it's not the guy you most want to work for. You know who's in charge. He is and you're not. You follow orders. If you don't, off with your head. It's kind of nice because you know where you stand. This is day of command decision-making is dominant. There's a transition from on this side of the curve from command, towards more consensus. That says consensus. Then back towards command as things are falling apart and things go back into crisis. Here we're marching across the plains, we're conquering. And if you want to understand leadership, and every one of you should be students, you should in this room be obliged to be students of leadership. You have to know Alexander the Great. And that's the most autocratic thing to say, but you must know Alexander. The reason you must know Alexander is because he created the mold that people have been following. Julius Caesar followed, Napoleon followed, Hitler followed, Patton followed. People have been following the mold of Alex. If you don't know what the mold is, you're a little bit lost in terms of what leadership is. Frank Lorenzo doesn't know the mold, okay? It's very important because Alexander created what we now call loyalty and what leaders have sought from their followers ever since. Alexander, as you know, took over his father Philip II's army when he was 20 years old. By the time he's 30, he conquered virtually all the known world at that time. Barbarians tend to be young. Young people tend to get it done. Barbarians tend to get it done young, and young people tend to be barbarians. The only trouble is anytime a bureaucrat meets a barbarian on the battlefield, the battle's over before it's begun because one's counting and recording, the other's killing. It's kind of a simple concept, you know. Ho Chi Minh, you know what he said? He said, you'll kill 10 of my men for every one of yours I kill, but it is you who will tire of it first. It's a barbarian. Can you imagine a U.S. general saying, you'll kill 10 of my men for every one of yours I kill? He would have been run out of town on a rail. That's something General Patton would have said. You know what an aristocrat is? Aristocrat, you look the word up in the dictionary, means the inheritor of wealth. Now, just think about it. A couple years ago, I did a talk at the Marquis de Lafayette Hotel in Boston. What a hotel. You go in, your carpet's 6 inches thick, you just kind of bounce across. They have the chandelier, must have 10 tiers of brass, fills up the whole room. Guys in monkey suits come out, take your bags whether you like it or not. I go up to the counter to check in. I give my American Express card. It's 9:30 at night. I have guaranteed late arrival. And the guy says, yeah, we got your reservation, but it'll be an hour. They're cleaning the rooms. Now, look, we all screw up. I mean, you know, we all screw up. That's okay. I can deal with that. But the problem was the way he told me, it was like, so you have another question? I said, no, excuse me, you have a chandelier. What do I know? You know. I was used to Holiday Inns where they got the rooms clean. But all the trappings, the artwork of wealth was present. But the substance and spirit that creates the wealth was gone. After I did my talk the next day, I went out into the hall outside the room where I talked, and all around the hall were these fox hunt pictures. You know, I'd always wondered, what's the deal with these fox hunt pictures? I figured it came to me. I had a vision. It came to me what the deal was with these fox hunt pictures. Who goes on fox hunts? Yeah, I mean, there's a barbarian going on a fox hunt. Well, a barbarian wants a fox, man. He'll get himself a fox. And he doesn't go around yelling tally-ho either to get him. Every revolution in human history has been caused not by revolutionaries, but by aristocrats, out of touch and alienated from the people doing the work, the peasants, the followers, whatever you want to call them. Some people think that the colonists sat up in New York and Philadelphia and Boston in taverns brainstorming ideas for a new nation. That didn't happen until 10 years after the revolution. They wanted to be good Englishmen, but King George didn't speak English. And the significance of the Townshend Acts was that the Townshend Acts proved to the colonists that they don't know what the hell is going on over here. They're completely out of touch with it. And it's that feeling of being out of touch with what's happening in our lives, where we live, that produces revolution. Robert McNamara left Ford Motor Company and went where? DOD, as we were about to do what? Go to Vietnam. I was in Vietnam. It was great. We did a great job of keeping track of stuff, man. You know, we had, if we could have beat them with filing cabinets, we would have beat the hell out of those bastards, okay? Well, I got another idea. Now, you might look at this whole curve and say, Jesus, you know, I mean, 21 civilizations have come and gone. What the hell? We may as well go to the orgy, right? I mean, what do we...